Hello and welcome to the Recovery Matters podcast from CCAR, the podcast where putting recovery first is always the goal. Here we present interviews, discussions, stories, and speeches to cultivate the understanding and acceptance of the power, hope, and healing of recovery from alcohol and other addictions. Here are your hosts, Phil and Sandy Valentine.
Phil, how are you today?
Today I'm pretty good.
Are you?
I think so. I was just thinking of the weather. It's like this real oppressive, humid weather that not fun to walk in. Too many bugs.
Yeah, it's definitely buggy.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of walking, it makes me think of a pathway.
Oh, I see where you're going.
Which makes me think of multiple pathways.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, the beginning of my recovery journey was all about 12-step recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, I kind of moved into more of my pathway really being God.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went to the Recovery Coach Academy and then later on secured my Recovery Coach professional designation through CCAR, I had a chance to really expand my whole mindset about all types of pathways that people pursue and the empowerment that we have to put together whatever works for us, put all the pieces together. And it's been such a joy to talk about all the different opportunities with my students that I work with because nobody wants to be told what to do, really, in any circumstance. We may have one child that likes to get told what to do, but for the most part, nobody wants to be told what to do.
Which child is that?
Well, Josh, as long as it's
okay.
not us. Yeah, as long as we're not the ones telling him.
He's the obedient firstborn.
Yeah. So I'm excited today because our special guest has another pathway of recovery for me to be thinking about.
I do. Hi, Robin. Say hello to everybody.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm excited to be here.
Are you going to tell us how you found CCAR? And we were talking a little bit before you to have your RCP designation. And
yes.
So let's start at the beginning. As far back as you'd like to go, talk to us about young Robin.
So young Robin at age 7 went on was told by her grandmother and mother that she was getting chubby and she had to be put on a diet. And this was at summer camp, and all the kids in my bunk and all, we sat at a table. They would all eat desserts every day, and every day they would bring me Jell-O, and that was like the only thing I could have for dessert. And every day I would run out of the dining room and I would slam the door, and I would be so humiliated. And that began a lifetime of a path of humiliation for me. And I know this because when I looked at it in my journey, I saw that I had been humiliated in public like over 20 times. And I never really thought it was a pattern. I know it was a soul pattern for me, something that I had to learn so that I could play a bigger role and that I wouldn't be afraid to come on a podcast like this or have my own podcast. And so I realized at some point that I really needed to do healing because I was struggling for 40 years with obsessive compulsive food disorder and bulimia. And I was, I have a friend who's a medium, and she said, your grandmother wants to talk to you. And I said, all right. And she said, your grandmother wants you to know that if you don't bury your bulimia, your family will bury you. So I said, okay. So of course, like most addicts, I had to have one more huge blowout with food, pig out as I used to call them. And then I went and I was having a bulimic episode, but then there was like blood coming out of my nose. And then it was almost as if, guys, the divine turned my body inside out as I'm lying there on the floor in the bathroom, and I could feel everything that was happening to all of my organs. What was going on in my head was throbbing, my lower back was throbbing. I could see my organs, and I'm like, okay, they're serious here. So that was my rock bottom, and then I had to still and still to this day struggle with the obsessive compulsive food disorder. Or wouldn't say I struggle. I have to manage it every day through a lot of discipline. But I have not had bulimia since that time on the bathroom floor. So I got into recovery through psychotherapy and following my spiritual path. But then this is a funny story. One of my guides is Yeshua, who most people know as Jesus. And he was calling everyone I know who he communicates with to tell me that I had to get a recovery coach professional designation. And I'm like, all right. But so he kept calling for like a year, calling them, psychically. And then I found CCAR, and here I am. I did the recovery coach designation. I really love the program, and that's where I met Stacy. And then from there, I'm also an author. I wrote a book called Feast and Famine, Healing Addiction with Grace. It's one of my 4 books. I'm working on a 5th one. And I wrote that book with Sophia, the Divine Mother, the Holy Spirit. In Judaism, she's called Shekhinah. And she had me write this book, and I wrote it for the first time. And at the end of the book, it was like, well, I hope these teachings work for you. They didn't work for me, so have a nice life. So then I said, I can't do this until I'm in recovery. And then once I was in recovery, I finished the book, which I'd love to talk about that book even more detail later. And then once I wrote the book, I realized it was so cathartic for me to write this book about my recovery that maybe I could blend my recovery coach professional designation, my experience with being an author. And so I became a writing recovery coach. And now I'm working on a workbook called The Right Recovery, WRTE, which I'm going to be doing the workbook and teaching hopefully in the fall, where Stacy and I are working on dates for the CCAR community.
That's wonderful. I'm connecting quite a bit with even just the beginning of your story. You can see my husband's head nodding quite a bit. Yeah. I too have, I don't know how to label it. I think most recently I just label it as a food addiction because it does have all those components over most of my life. But right about that age 7, I'm the tallest of 5 children, which is ironic because now with our family and our 5 kids, I'm the shortest. But I grew up being taller than my siblings, taller than my grandmother. And every time I saw my grandmother, she would say, "Oh, you're so big." And I know most of the time she was referring to the fact that I was tall. Yes. But that word big landed and brought such shame. And then navigating middle school and high school, carrying all the shame, all the bullying from elementary school, pig noises. Like, I don't, folks adopt pigs as, like a cute souvenir or a piggy bank. Like, I don't ever mention pig, ever buy anything pig. I never bought any stuffed animals, all because kids would use the oink oink noise sound bite around me. So I know I went on a little too long there, but basically where I was getting to is that shame at such a young age, even when I was thin, I didn't know it. So I could really connect with, the beginning of your story.
Yeah, and even my mom, no surprise that she has an eating disorder too, that, she has a body image disorder, weighs herself every day, still 94, right? And she'll look back at pictures and she'll get angry because she's like, I wasn't fat. I'm like, no, Ma, you weren't. She goes, but I thought I was. Society thought I was. My parents thought I was, but I wasn't. She's like, I was actually quite cute. Like, it's so cute to hear her now at 94 come into that realization. But interesting, because in Feast and Famine with Sophia, when she asked me to write the book, she asked me, to write the book. She told me the name of it. So I'm a writer for the Ascended Masters, and they come to me with topics that they want to put out in the world. And she said, I want you to write a book about addiction, but you have to tell your story too. And that's when I said, uh-oh, I better fake it till I make it, because I wasn't in recovery. And I wrote it anyway. And I wrote it anyway because what she said that was so profound to me is that there is only one addiction on the planet, and that's to suffering. And then we choose our substance or our vice or our habit to feel better from the suffering that we haven't healed. And I just said, I don't care if I'm not in recovery, I have to write this book. But then, of course, I said at the end, I had no ending. So I had to wait till I came into recovery to write an ending. And then in recovery, I rewrote the whole book, and wow, what a difference between writing from addiction and writing from recovery. It was like night and day. And yet there were some parts in the book that I was guided to keep the addiction writing and then compare it to the recovery writing. Because Sophia had 4 main points that she wanted to express. One is that pain is inevitable. And we cannot, the only thing pain is like death and taxes, right? We're going to have it, right? Like we can't get out of it. So, but she also said that suffering is an option. And I said, oh, Buddha said these. And she said, she was funny. She said, do you think you're the first person I said these things to?
Oh.
And I'm like, no. So she's like, so this is important. People need to understand that suffering is an option. We think of pain and suffering in the same sentence, right? Oh, she has a lot of pain and suffering. Not necessary. So suffering is an option. And the third is surrender is required. And that is that there's a difference between wishful thinking and surrender, right? We all know that. We know when we've surrendered, it's like, let go, let God, right? It's the epitome of that statement, right? When you are like, I am done. I am done. And then the way that you know you're truly in surrender is that you almost seem to almost instantaneously know what you were suffering about in the first place. It's almost like it comes as an epiphany, like right away, like, oh, that's it. And even like in the day-to-day, right? You'll like, I can't figure this out. You go in the shower, you get out of you're in the physical mode, right? So you're not really in your head. And then what happens? You get the answer, right? Because you've surrendered it, right? And you're taking a shower, right? You're bathing and you're not thinking about it. So we have pain is inevitable, suffering is an option, surrender is required, and the fourth is grace must be allowed. And her thoughts on that were, grace is available to us 24 hours a day. It will arrive, it's right there, it's everywhere. We just don't see it, right? We don't see it. But when I was most intrigued with must be allowed, I really wanted to know what that meant. And the guidance I received was that we're all capable of receiving grace, but do we really want it? Because sometimes, we play a role in our lives, that's so-and-so, she can't get out of her own way, right? Like we have these roles, and sometimes we don't want to receive grace. And the other is that when you're on the path to receiving grace, it's almost like you have to make a commitment to do your healing of the trauma that created the suffering in the first place. So you have to be ready. When you're in surrender, you're almost saying, I'm ready to cross the bridge and go into healing. And so that's what Feast and Famine is about. It follows my journey. It follows guidance from Sophia. She writes a little note to everybody for each chapter. I love that book. I guess I'm supposed to love my book, but it really helped me come into recovery as well. And that's what got me excited about teaching others to use writing as a tool for recovery.
So there's so many things I could talk about, but you talked about being on the bathroom floor and your organs kind of turning inside out. How long ago was that?
I'm going to say that was like 3 years ago, maybe four now. I should have wrote
Wow.
that date down, Phil. I can't remember. I love how everybody's like, I'm in recovery for
Oh,
20
yeah.
years, 4 months, and 3 days. I don't know my date.
No, that's
But
fine. I just wanted a rough time frame.
yeah,
And what were you doing for, is this your life work now, is being an author, and has it always been, or,
no. Mhm. No, I spent the first half of my career in corporate America. I had a wonderful job at the wonderful set of jobs at the Hartford. And are you from the Hartford?
Yeah, so
oh my
That's
God.
funny.
I'm getting
Phil's
like all
losing
these
it.
spirit rushes and like,
I
wow.
melted down after 33 years and retired, and now work with students in recovery. I worked at the
Yeah.
Hartford. Yes.
Oh, that's
She
great. We'll
had,
have to talk offline.
well, Robin, she has a book, and she already has the title, and it's called Shredded: How Corporate America Brought Me to My Knees.
It's just not
Oh,
written, Robin. It's not written. It's
It's
all in
not
my
written,
head.
but I want her to write it because she's
oh,
already
yes.
talked to other women about how this has happened to them in corporate America.
Yeah, where I knew that it was time to leave. So I was there for 22 years, 23 years or something like that. And I knew it was time to leave because I couldn't breathe in the building anymore. I was like, I'd step in the building and I couldn't breathe. And I mean, I was there for 20 something years, and I didn't know a lot because I really wasn't on my spiritual path then, but I was like reading past life books and saying, this is so interesting. But I wasn't truly on my path. And so I didn't know what I wanted to do when I got out. So I spent a year on my deck every night asking, how can I be of greater service to mankind? I didn't know the answer. And I went out and did the same prayer every night. And what I knew happened then is that I committed to a life of divine service. And I didn't know that then. I knew, but I started on this spiritual journey that was so profound, so much healing. And I decided that I would make my spiritual mantra, bring it on. Like, what am I, crazy? Right? Because they brought it on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not only did I have the most interesting and extraordinary experiences, but I had to go on a very fast healing path, because I'm like, bring it on, I'm committing. And they're like, okay. And so I didn't know how to leave corporate America. I kept trying. And for 3 years, I tried to get out. And I kept working on a business plan, or thinking I'm working on a business plan. And then here's a funny story. I finally was so fed up, I didn't want to be there anymore. And so I called a girlfriend, and her husband answered, and he's a mathematician. And he's like, oh, I'm sorry, but Nancy's not available. Can I help you? And I'm like, no, I'm sure you can't help me. But he's like, try me. And I said, I said, I really love adult education, and I really love spirituality, and I really love event planning. I'm like, I don't know what this new business is supposed to be. And he's like, well, why don't you solve for X? Isn't that great? Remember the math thing? You put A plus B plus C equals X. And so I put adult learning plus event production plus spirituality equals X. And I went into a very deep meditation, and I came out with this idea to be a spiritual business promoter. So I would create events that were spiritually based for adults. And I was like, oh my God, this math nerd figured out my business plan for me. When I was like, for 3 years, I couldn't figure it out. So then I left, and I had a couple of retreat centers here in the greater Hartford area. And I was very busy, inviting people in, other people. And then, of course, then my guidance said, what about you, Robin? You're the teacher. And I'm like, I am? That's too bad, because I really like being the event producer. I want to do that. I want to be behind the scenes, watching people's faces light up when, there's great knowings happening and aha moments. And then that's where I started, and I started writing. My first book is called Messiah Within, A Guide to Embracing Your Inner Divinity, and that was with Yeshua. And then I wasn't living the teachings, and he came back, and he said, I want you to write the next book, which was called The Divine Keys, 18 Keys to a Divinely Guided Life. And I wrote that, and then Sophia came in to write The Feast and Famine. And then I got a visit from King Solomon, who said that he wanted his spiritual warriors to become divine warriors. And when that happens, there'll be a tipping point on the planet where the rest of humanity will come into higher consciousness. So he's basically saying spiritual people need to lead the way. That's why we're all here. There is a reason why there's billions of spiritual people on the planet now, over half of the population, because we're the leaders to raise the consciousness and bring the rest of humanity with us. So that I did in an ebook and recordings. And now I'm working on an anthology with Flower of Life Press called The Reluctant Mystic. And that book is about people who have these deep spiritual callings, and they feel very reluctant about it, but they do it anyway. And then they change their world and the world around them. And so this is going to be an anthology. I'll be looking for 20 other authors to write with me, one chapter of this book about how they overcame their reluctance to fulfill their divine destiny.
So Robin, I'm really curious, like, what was your spiritual journey growing up? And then, how did it evolve to what it is today?
Yes. So I grew up in a traditional conservative reform Jewish home. So we did the holidays, but nothing, we weren't, Orthodox or anything like that. So we had a lot of family traditions, but we didn't really talk about spirituality. And I didn't even know that I had gifts, although my college roommate would tell you I had a lot of gifts. She'd be like, oh, what are you kidding me? You just came out and told me you were talking to your grandmother. It's almost like I forgot. But then the way this gift that I have was turned on is my first job out of college, I was working in public accounting, and in March of tax season, I stood up in the bullpen and I said, excuse me, but I have to leave. I have to go to New York City to see my grandmother. And I was in Hartford. And they're like, you can't leave now. It's tax season. I'm like, I am leaving now. And I called my family and I said, meet me at grandma's hospital room. I jumped on a train. I went down to New York. I was holding her, and she put her hands over my eyes and she said, don't look. They're not here for you. Don't look. Don't look at them. They're not here for you, which I mean, I think it wouldn't have mattered if I looked, but she didn't know better. And then she died in my arms. Wow. And it became like a joke in my family that if I feel that or hear that about them, I shouldn't come. I should stay back in Hartford. So that began my exploring my gifts. Like, how could I hear that? Right? Like, how did I know to go, and what was inside of me that allowed me to not be reluctant, right? And to go to New York. Otherwise, she probably would have been by herself when she passed instead of surrounded by her family. Yeah. Wow.
And then how did you pursue it from there? And
I started to pursue, I always had this idea that this is all energy, right? We're all energy. The universe is all energy. There is, that I can connect to anyone. And I have, including I had one conversation with God, which was so powerful. I was walking my dog Haley, and I said, God, it was a very profound night. I really have to set the stage. It was like, those nights when you're walking where there's like no air. It's so still, right? And I was the only one walking my dog. And I said, God, I'm sorry to say this, but I feel like if I commit myself to divine service, that you won't take care of me. And that is a pretty profound thing to say to God, right? Then all of a sudden I hear, my dear. And I'm like, oh boy. And I hear, my dear, did you know that God is dog spelled backwards? And I said, yeah, I probably read that in Facebook, right? And he said, so think of us as your dog, as you, and think of you as your dog. Is there anything that you wouldn't do for your dog? Anything? And I'm like, there is nothing I wouldn't do for my dog. And he said, and there is nothing that we wouldn't do for you. And I'm like, okay, thank you, God. And then it was, silence. And I looked at the dog and I'm like, oh my God, did you hear that? like I wanted to witness. The dog didn't respond. I'm not that good. But I was like, yes, isn't that true, right? We will all be taken care of, right? And we're never alone. And I think that's an important message for all of us in recovery. That's how I end my podcast, Hungry for Answers. That, you are not alone. There are services, there's your inner world, just reach out. And I think that's an important message for people who are in addiction or in early recovery, that they need to find their support and their community and their inner world, for sure.
What was your role at the Hartford? I mean, what were you doing there?
Well, I went in as a billing manager for the national accounts, and then I moved into human resources, but more not in a traditional like generalist type of role. I did all the fun stuff. I did the rewards and recognitions programs, and I worked for the chairman's office for a while. I also have a background in accounting and finance, so I had to do something real, something that looked substantial. So I was the controller for all of the corporate areas. I managed the benefits budgets and all the HR budgets, the law department, finance, government affairs, all the ones. And that was interesting. That's where I really learned how to communicate well, because those people didn't want to know at all about finance and money and budgets. So I had to find a way to take all of that complicated financial information and bring it down to a conversation, a language that made sense to them.
And what I'm getting to is that you are a competent professional, successful in the eyes of the world, maybe,
yes,
having this career at the Hartford, and you're struggling inside. It's like a dual life, right? Almost.
It was. In fact, I was talking to my husband about it yesterday, thinking about, I started at Society for Savings, and we were in downtown Hartford, and I said, do you remember the peanut store? You guys remember the peanut store? It was like, oh my God, it was like a peanut roaster. And I said, and every day I would go get my, because I was obsessively eating, I would go get my chocolate covered peanuts. So it was fun. We had like a little entrepreneurial discussion. Do you think that a peanut roaster? And he's like, I don't think so, with peanut allergies. I don't think it's the time to bring back the peanut roaster, right?
No.
No, but it was always there. It was always in every moment of thought. And I find too, and maybe you agree with me, food addiction is one of those addictions where it's okay to overeat, right? It's no one's watching you. Like it's like everybody does it, right? And yet we have I think the last time I looked at the statistic, there were 30 million people in this country struggling with food disorders. That's a lot of people.
It is.
And I think that we don't really look at food the same way we look at all of the hardcore addictions. And that's part of why I started Hungry for Answers. And that was a name that the divine gave me, which I'm like, oh my God, that's perfect, right? For me to have a podcast. And so this year I've been on the podcast, I've been really talking to people with all types of recovery, because I believe that there's so many different types of reasons you're in recovery, so more than what we even know, right? Mm-hmm. Like, so, I invite anyone on. If you're in recovery from something, I want to hear about it, mm-hmm. right? And so it could be even, obviously the obvious ones, drugs and alcohol, or Netflix, I always say, or porn, or gambling, or food, or sugar, or an abusive relationship, or other people in your life, the recovery ally. That's what I had Stacy come on to talk about, the recovery ally, because it was such a profound moment for me on the show when she said, I'm in recovery, I'm a recovery ally. And I'm like, yes, you are. You're mm-hmm. in recovery too, from your experience. Mm-hmm. And it was like a light bulb went off for me, that I didn't realize that all of these recovery allies are also in recovery.
Mm-hmm. Robin, you mentioned not being able to breathe in the building, right? Those are some of your signals. And for me, for probably over 10 years, every time I walked across from the ramp parking garage into the tower, my right eye would start pouring water. And it would just pour water all day. Like the minute I hit the carpet on that bridge. Yes. And so my body was signaling all types of things until, finally my body told me so much that I was unable to work there any longer. So I really connected with you sharing that part of the story.
And I think we don't listen to our bodies enough. Right? I think our bodies are always giving us the signals that we need to pay attention. So this winter I was walking our new dog, Allie, and I didn't know that she had wrapped her leash around my legs, and I started to walk, but my legs were tied up, right? And I fell flat on my face. But my dad was there to catch me, and he put his hand over my mouth, and as I etherically, and I didn't break anything. Literally felt flatlined on the fell flat on the sidewalk. Mm-hmm. And so I felt very I looked horrible. I looked like I had just been in a heavyweight boxing battle, but nothing really went wrong. Like I didn't have concussion or broken bones, but I spent 2 weeks. I had my bell rung, it was like, so I couldn't work. Mm-hmm. But so those 2 weeks I sat there saying, what was that? Why did you take me out, Spirit? Why did you take me out for 2 weeks? What is it what I need to know? And I just was moving too fast. And I find that when I'm moving too fast beyond what I'm really capable of, Spirit will take me out. And the first thing they do, though, is interesting. I feel like the first signal I get is like someone punched me in the gut, and I'll be like, uh-oh, I better rest. And it's so great that I've recognized this physical symptom, right? Mm-hmm. But I do believe that I don't believe our bodies want to be in charge, but they're part of the integrated system, which is mind, body, spirit, and emotion. And most of the time people put their bodies in charge, and that's the problem, because they should be putting their spirit in charge.
Are you going to tell your story?
So Phil's been over here. Every time you talk, he's
having what is going on with this podcast?
The connection point.
Maybe we're recovery twins.
Yeah, maybe. So a year, 9 months after, 6 or 7 months after I left corporate life, I was working on the campus of the University of Connecticut in a temp job working with students in recovery, feeling like I owned the world, like God had provided me the answer for my, what I refer to as my second act, and all was great. It was a beautiful sunny day. I had just moved into a cute little office in one of the residence halls, and I was walking out of the building to go to another meeting and looking at the sky, which was gorgeous, walking briskly, because, I had been curved over a computer for 33 years. So now I was in a workspace where I could walk somewhere, like feeling on top of the world. And my toe hit a paver that was up, and I ended up breaking the top of my humerus at the shoulder in 3 places and dislocating it, laying on the ground screaming for help because there was no one around and I couldn't reach my phone. And God took me out of what I thought, this is what it's all about. And I had to learn. So during the departure from the Hartford, I learned a lot about anxiety. I had always been pull your big girl pants up and solve things. That was always my mantra. And I really didn't have any empathy for people with acute anxiety. Well, I went through a season of acute anxiety, which one of our producers here at CCAR heard my story and said, you were leaving a traumatic relationship with an employee, with the corporate. And it really hit home. So I had that experience. And then the experience of being taken out, unable to care for myself, sleeping in a recliner for 6 months. I learned a lot more lessons. And I feel like both of those seasons have brought an empathy and other things to my life that allow me to work better with my students. Hopefully are helping me to be a better parent and a better wife.
And the other piece to that, as she's like, I liked what you said about taking you out. They take me out, But talk a little bit, Sandy, about your relationship with food over the last few months too, and what's changed.
So here I am. I'm a health promotion manager, and so in addition to working with students in recovery, I'm bringing wellness practices and thinking to the larger community. And there's a lot of really good work being done about positive body image and accepting yourself for who you are. And so up until last year, I really worked hard on, I had done every diet. I've had lap band surgery. You name it, I've done everything in my lifetime. And for the last year, just prior to May, I was like, I'm going to focus on accepting and trying to love the shell I'm in, even if it is 100 pounds overweight. I'm going to just try to accept myself. And I got to that place where I was accepting myself and began to prepare myself to apply my recovery tools. So all those diets, everything I ever did, the surgery, I never applied recovery tools and practices to my food addiction. And so, I began that journey in May, and like you said, I'm not talking about it a lot. I'm not posting on Facebook about it a lot because I have not, I'm not done, right? I'm still working it. And so I don't feel like I've gotten to a place where, and I'm not sure what success is. I just know I feel a heck of a lot better today than I did in May. But it's a journey.
Yeah, so that's beautiful. That's beautiful. And it's really, it's almost as if applying the mindfulness practices to how you are taking care of yourself. But I kept hearing strongly when you fell, it was about learning to receive versus giving all the time. And I also believe that this not posting on Facebook is about giving to yourself instead of and receiving all the bounty of the recovery tools and not giving yourself away to others in this. This is about you and your recovery and your relationship with the divine, right? And it doesn't have to be shared in social media, because you're developing that relationship with the divine even stronger now. And this is what I think, I have goosebumps too, Sandy. This is what is really required, is our own relationship and with the divine. And then we can choose to share it, but we've got to honor it. We've got to honor our recovery, and we've just got to ground it. And that's what you're doing now. And when all is said and done, I'm pretty confident there will be a program that will be yours. And so you're taking, everybody, this is really important. Our soul has been guiding us for our entire lives, the good, the bad, and the ugly, but it's all bringing us so that we can fulfill our destiny, right? That our soul is hopeful for us, everything that we need to learn. So at some point, everything comes together, and we say, wow, if I take everything that I've learned, everything that I've experienced, everything that I desire to do, and put it all together, I can really truly serve at a level that is profound, and I can fulfill my destiny. And I think you're in the middle of this now. And Phil, the same for you. I mean, you have established that, right, with CCAR, right? But there were many roads that led there, right?
Oh,
many roads, right?
Yeah.
So Sandy, hang in there, and you go, girl, right? Because it will lead to something really magnificent.
And just to affirm, this is the first time I've done it for myself in the way that I want to do it for myself. Yeah. Even though there's still people in my life that may not agree with the way I'm doing it.
Yes.
I fully support the way she's doing it. I'm so proud of her.
Yes.
And she just is, it's one meal at a time, one day at a time. You really focus on the present. And yeah.
And how we have this twin thing going on. I have this situation with a very dear person to me, is also following a more accepting of her body mindfulness path, and it's really hard for me. For me, it's been hard not to. It's almost like part of her journey is part of my recovery. Because I'm thinking about how I'm speaking to her, and am I in recovery, or am I the wounded child talking to her, right? And so it's been incredible. So thank you for sharing that, because that helped me to let me look at the recovery tools, so that when I'm in conversation with this person, I can use those as well.
I'm impressed too. I think journey is always, Bill Wilson in Alcoholics Anonymous said it's everything else is a journey towards humility. But what you're talking about is self-awareness. And I've always been mind, body, spirit, emotional, just being completely, as best you can, aware of yourself in any given moment. That's all we can truly be in the universe, right? And, I
agree.
And I'm still want to bring this, and I want to ask you the same question, but Sandy's often shared to me about the early childhood of being called fat and chubby and big and all that, and the shame associated with it. And then somewhere early in our relationship, she brought out pictures of herself, and she wasn't any of that either. I didn't, even like in your early teens, the pictures and all that, you were just a tall girl. It wasn't perfectly normal. And when you look at pictures of yourself, how do you see yourself?
Well, for me, it's interesting because this is maybe, what is that? Too much information? TMI.
TMI, right.
But I'll have a TMI moment.
Okay.
I got my period very early and matured very early. So in fifth grade, I looked like a woman. And I can remember hearing my parents saying, Oh, thank God I was 9 actually.
9.
Thank God she's 10. Thank God she's 11. Thank God she's 12. Like they were waiting for me to grow into my body, so that I would be mature enough to handle a woman's body.
Mm-hmm.
And I think having that experience of menstruating so early and nobody else was, and there was so much shame, and I was hiding, and I couldn't go to sleepovers, and I couldn't swim. There was so many more restrictions than don't go in the water.
Yeah, right.
Don't take a shower. I had older parents.
Don't take a shower?
Yeah, I did anyway, but yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, there was just so much around that I think that I had to feel just learn to accept myself, but I couldn't, and all of that went with me for 40 years, from till I was in my late 40s, early 50s, maybe
Mm-hmm.
longer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, excuse me. Sorry. I started with the bulimia when I was 17. And then it ended when I was 57. But the bulimia started because this is fun. I know a lot of our listeners will relate. We used to party our brains out in this, in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And then we would eat, we'd pig out, right? Munchies. And I found bulimia as a way to not gain weight, because I didn't want to hear the wrath of my parents about gaining weight. So I was using it as more of a diet tool. And let me say this, everybody, bulimia is not a diet tool. So I want to say that very clear, because what happens in bulimia is your body thinks you're in starvation mode, and it doesn't know whether you're going to keep the nutrition or not. And so it turns off any ability to burn calories. And so you're not going to lose weight through bulimia. You're just going to hold on to all the other calories. So do not even think, oh, bulimia. No, please don't go there. It's a really a dreadful form of addiction too, even though it doesn't sound as bad as the others. But when you're living every day wondering, did what I ate, was what I ate good? Was it bad? What can I have next? Well, I already had, a piece of cake at the corporate birthday parties. How many pieces of cake do we have? Mm-hmm. Right? Well, I might as well go out and have pizza for lunch, right? And then what am I going to have for dinner, right? And so when you're obsessive about food, it really is what you're thinking about all day. How many times can I go to the vending machine, at work? Everything. And so here I am working from home, and I manage the obsessive eating through managing what I'm eating. Like I use an app called MyFitnessPal, and I do it so that I can see how I'm doing, but I do it so that I see what I'm eating, and then I'm very busy watching the nutrients. How much nutrients have I had today? And so I'm like, good job. And so that's the way I do it, through MyFitnessPal, through walking every day, and drinking all of my water. And combining all of those three things just allows me to do the best that I can. I'm not going to tell you I'm perfect, believe
Mm-hmm.
me. It's a daily, meal by meal, snack by snack decision for me still.
Right. You talk about the power of our bodies to talk to us, and I'm brought back to when I started the Appalachian Trail in 2015, and I was carrying a lot of weight. I was up over 250 pounds, and I think I'm probably good around 220, 225. And so, but I had, like, they said 2 pounds of food per day. So I had 10 pounds of extra weight in my backpack. And I got to the very first campsite. I was hiked 8 miles in the pouring rain and wind, and I thought I should be really hungry. And I wasn't. But I made this terrible meal, and I tried to choke it down, threw some of it out, a lot of guilt. But I learned 4 days later, I got rid of most of that food. And someone told me, well, just carry what you like to eat, because I had all these preconceived notions. But I wasn't eating very much, because my body said, basically, all right, you're going to be walking a long way. You've already done it for 4 or 5 days. Let's get rid of the stuff we have on the calories I was carrying on my body. And then by the end of the trail, I was thin as a rail down to 196, and I could eat anything. It was like the furnace was stoked up so much that it just went, I could feel it go in, burn, dissipate. In the 100-mile wilderness in Maine, I ate 5 Skittles, and within a minute, I could feel the energy surge through my body. That's how tuned and how much that hyper exercise had me really tuned into my body. I've lost it since, but it's still there a little bit, but I would like to get some of that back.
Well, and it was even more than that, wouldn't you say? There was the body, but in that experience, it was the mind, body, spirit, and emotion. It was like your integrated machine was like working at full capacity there.
Yeah, right? I was not only talking to God, and I was talking to animals too. So in the 100-mile wilderness, this red squirrel came down along this log and stood at the end and started speaking squirrel, but I heard English. And he held up his acorn. He said, "Look at my acorn. Isn't this a beauty?" Wow. And I think I said in English, but I could have been squirrel. I said, "Yeah, it's a beauty. Where'd you get it?" He goes, "I just dug it up. I can't believe I found it. I'm going to go show my family." And he took off off the log and just ran into the woods and was gone. And I walked like 20 more steps, and I was like, what just happened? Because I'm like talking openly to squirrels now. And I don't know if that was lack of nutrition or just complete integration into my surroundings.
Immersion is the word.
Immersion, yeah.
Right? Immersion, right? It was, you were completely one. You were in oneness.
Yeah.
Right? With the entire environment. Mm-hmm. And I went to my first assignment that I was given when I made that commitment was to go to be of divine service. My guidance sent me to the Oneness University in Chennai, India, and basically the whole place it's an ashram, but once you step in, they actually don't even let you out because the energy is so profound there that it's like you're walking in a meditation. And I think that's what you were doing, was you were hiking in a meditative state. Mm-hmm. And so this was so profound there, and there was so much healing, inner child work, and then we were receiving all of this energy, blessings and healings from these very high-powered, supercharged energy beings. And one day we had just received Diksha, which is a hands-on energy transfer. And they said, everybody, you're basically so high, you should go sit on the grass. And so everybody sat on the grass. And all of a sudden I heard this choir of men chanting Om. Like it was the most beautiful choir. And I'm thinking, where is this choir? It must be like outside the fence, right? They really didn't let us sit out. And so I said to everybody, did you hear that? Did you hear that Om? Nobody heard that but me. And I would come to find out that I was hearing the sound of the universe because I was so, from all that energy healing, I was so connected in oneness to all the universal energies that I could actually hear it talking to me through this choir of Oms from these male voices that was just significant, so magnificent. Yeah.
So how has this been for your family as you've grown through this and expanded the way you look at the world and spirituality?
Well, it wasn't at first it wasn't easy for them because they were used to corporate Robin. Mm-hmm. And I remember when I left corporate, you'll appreciate this, my daughter was going into 9th grade, and she said to me, "Mom, what if I need 5 pairs of pants at once?" And I said, "Well, if you need 5 pairs of pants at once, I really have done something wrong here. I'll have to rethink my parenting style." And then she's like, "Well, wait." She's like, "But that means that every day when I come out of school, you'll be waiting for me." And I'm like, "That's right. I'll be able to pick you up every day." And she's like, okay, that's very cool. And then so that's how it began. I was so much more available to them. And so so they took the good, the good with the bad. There were moments where I was so so spent. I'm thinking of a word, from all of the healing that I had to do, and I would be almost spacey at times because I didn't know how to. I had to learn how to ground my spirituality in my physical body. And what I mean by that is I would I was taught to, go off onto some mountain in my meditation to meet with spirit, right? And talk to them there, right? Not at the Oneness University, but that's what I thought we had to do. I thought we had to leave our bodies and be etheric. And then I realized, no, you come to me, because I live here on the earth plane and I'm going to ground my spirituality inside me. And so if someone wants to talk to me, come to me. I'm not leaving my body. I am doing heaven on earth, right? I'm going to stay here. Mm-hmm. And if you want to have a relationship with me, come speak to me here. And that's how I started to do it, because I knew I was obligated and lovingly obligated to be the best mother and wife and daughter and sister and friend that I could be, and teacher. And that requires one foot on the earth and my other foot in the spiritual realm. And so I had to find a way to find that balance in my life. And the best way that I could do that was to ground my energy. But to get to where I am today, I really had to do a tremendous amount of healing work. I had to figure out why I was suffering and look at all that trauma, all those parts of me that were traumatized, and find them and love them and heal them, and then integrate them back into this entire system, which is me.
So how do you heal? I mean, you can go in, you can remember things, recall things, you can experience the emotion, but what is the healing process like for you?
I think that is the healing process. I think that when you have that healing experience. So for me, oh my gosh, it was so much like pulling it out of from the depths of me, and then it would get caught in my throat, and then I would be like choking on it until I could breathe and get it out with wailing, basically. It was a lot of wailing. And then once I could ground myself back in my body, it was as if I had put the emotional charge out of whatever that part of me was. And then it was required, once I accepted that happened, and it was a part of my soul journey, and it was required to make me the person that I am today at this exact moment in time, and who I will be in the future, then that level of acceptance, I think, is the healing. That it happened, but I don't have to suffer from it anymore, because it's not going away. The experience isn't going away. It's not like, oh, purge it out, get rid of it. It's there. It's always there. Mm-hmm. But how we manage it, how we witness it, right? Once it's healed, you become the witness of it. And I think that witnessing is what you were talking about earlier, Phil, is when you're observing your life more. Mm-hmm. Right? Like yesterday, I had 3 strange things happened that could have emotionally got me, right? And then I'm like, okay, step back. Like, why did I draw these things to me? What is happening? And then today I realized that I had not returned somebody's phone call it was important to them. And then I had 3 things happen to me, sort of the same thing. And I'm like, okay, Spirit, I will return the call this afternoon. So it's this witnessing of things aren't happening to me, they're happening for me. right? And to say, what are you doing? Why is this in your field, Robin? Why is this happening? And once I can see that, I can say, where am I falling short? And then I look, and then I know I have to return this phone call, because every day I keep thinking, I have to return this phone call. I have to return this phone call. I have to return this phone call, right? It's been like 2 weeks, right? And then, of course, then finally Spirit's like, well, let's give you a taste of your own medicine. No, they don't do that.
No,
but they really don't. But they presented situations to me, or I called them to me, that were like, wow, I don't like this. And then I'm like, well, neither does that other person, right? Let me get on it. So I promised to call her today.
Yeah, I always feel like I have enough experience now to see God's hand working in situations where I was very confused. So now if I pause for a moment, if I'm really confused about circumstances, like what is going on, I acknowledge God is working, and his ability to navigate a situation is way outside my feeble mind. So that's why I'm confused. He's not confused in this moment, but I am very confused.
Yeah. And even just a quick story, when I was writing Messiah Within, I when Yeshua asked me to write it, I was really, I didn't know how to write. I wasn't a channel, and I wasn't a Christian scholar, and I wasn't a Judaic scholar. And I'm like, pick somebody else. And he's like, I'm picking you because you have one of the biggest hearts that I know on the planet. And I'm like, okay. So he said, let me tell you the 12 steps. And he gave me the 12 steps. And I realized I had lived the first 10 of them, but I hadn't lived the last 2. And I'm like, well, I wonder when they're going to happen. And that was really learning how to be patient, right? And what happened was the 11th step came in with the same spiritual 2x4 that the first 10 did, right? It was very obvious. It was step 11, but then I didn't know where step 12 was. And so I said, I'm going to go to the beach, and I'm just going to write the end of the book. I'm going to write step 12. I'm done. I want this over with, right? So then I hear, take Doreen, which was a friend of mine. I'm like, I'm not taking Doreen. She doesn't know how to stop talking. like, how am I supposed to write, right? I can't write with Doreen. So we get there, and I'm like, all right, I'll take her. I mean, we drove up to Gloucester. I didn't get one word in, like, the entire trip. And so I get there, and all of a sudden my right hand starts to hurt, and I know I can't type, and I don't know what to do. And it was like maybe like December, and it was 85 degrees or something like that. And all these people were on the beach with their dogs, because you could bring dogs on Good Harbor Beach then. And I'm like, you know what, let's just spend the day on the beach. And we had the best time. Oh my God, it was like a spiritual play date, girlfriends. And then the next day I woke up at sunrise, and my hand miraculously didn't hurt. And I walk out onto the beach, and I go down to the water, and Yeshua arrived to talk to me, and it was the end of the book. And so my point is, beyond the miracle of that, I thought if I had written the ending the day before, it wouldn't have been the ending. So what did God do, right? He sent Doreen to distract me, and he sent pain in my hand, right? So that there was no way I could have been typing for a day. It was really very painful. But then the next day, I lived the ending of the book at sunrise, and I came back in and I typed it, and Doreen didn't talk to me for many hours. And then we went home. But I just love that, because I love the fact that he gave me all 12, and I didn't know if I had lived the 11th and the 12th, and then I had to wait to live both. Yeah.
So if people wanted to purchase your books, where would they go?
Yeah, so they can go either to my website, which is clarity.com, CLARE-ITY.com, or of course Amazon or Barnes and Noble. They're all there too.
Great. Anything else you'd like to add to our conversation?
Yes, I do. I just want to say that I'm really excited to to bring the right recovery program to CCAR. And as I said, I'm working with Stacy. We're looking at maybe the end of September to begin. It's a 7-week program, and Stacy will be putting, information out, and I'll have it on my website as well. So I look forward to seeing folks in that class. I think it would be a great program, not for people who are in recovery, but people who are also working with other people in recovery, to learn these tools. And I am having such a blast writing the workbook. I've never written a workbook before, and like that. And so this is fun, like coming up with all the activities. And so you will have a workbook, but I will be joining you live for each session, to teach it and to facilitate the conversation. So as you can tell, I like to talk, and I have lots of good stories. So
well, we also have,
I'm hoping you'll join us.
We have our storytelling thing we do too, and I just trained this week, recovery coaching and professionalism. It was a smaller class. There were 12 people, but 2 of them expressed an interest about using writing to support their recovery. And that hasn't happened ever in all the classes I've ever trained before. So something's surfacing right now. So I'm pretty excited about this. Yeah.
Yes, I am too. And I'm, for me, it's really the culmination of now, right? For me, it's teaching, it's writing, it's recovery, it's storytelling. It's like, this is, and again, I was walking in the reservoir 2 years ago with my husband and the dog, and just out of the blue, Spirit said, the right recovery. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. But see, that was 2 years ago. And here it is now, coming into play, because I also believe in divine timing. Like, just because Spirit, you hear something or someone gives you a message, you don't have to jump right now. You can let it unfold and let it come to you in its divine timing.
I agree.
You have anything you'd like to add, Sandy?
No, it's just been a pleasure getting to know you, and
Thank you.
The connections were a little bit overwhelming at times, but we're obviously here today for a reason, so thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Sandy, and thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Robin. This was great. I loved it.
Good.